Hello everyone, and welcome to this Roblox tutorial. Today we're going to be learning how to script a door. And when you're scripting a door, there's two ways you can do it. You can either use hinge constraints, which make the door rotate around an axis of your choice, or you can use tweening, and tweening is the version we're going to be using today. So first of all, let me go ahead and test so you can see what this door model actually does. So, this door, when you click it, will open up in the opposite direction of whatever place you're standing on. As you can see here, depending on what side I stand on, it'll open the opposite way, and then it'll close back itself. And this is a lot more simple than it seems at the beginning. And the reason I'm using tweening today is because hinge constraints don't allow you to do these cool animations as you can see here. So, without further ado, we're going to be replicating this script onto this door, which has not been scripted yet. The first thing you want to do is open up your Explorer and your properties. Those are the main things you're going to be using whenever you're making anything on Roblox. Very important to have these two. And this is my old script, but we're going to be making this from zero. I'm going to be explaining everything each step of the way. If you don't want to follow along, I will leave this whole code in the description or somewhere else. There's probably some text on the screen right now telling you where it is. So don't worry about this. Now, we're going to go into our door model that we have to script now. And the first thing we want to make sure is that there's nothing under here that is in a group. We want to make sure it's all in parts. It can be mesh parts, it can be union parts, but you have to make sure it's all in parts, everything. Except obviously the script you're going to insert. But make sure nothing is grouped. And secondly, make sure every part inside the model is anchored. When we're welding, we will unanchor whatever we need to unanchor after we've welded. But to begin with, we're going to anchor it just to make sure nothing gets displaced. So, now that we've got that out of the way, you're going to right click on your door model. You're going to click Insert Object down here. And you're going to click on Script. If you can't find this object, you can always use this search bar and just type in whatever you want to use. So we want to use a normal server-side script. So, whenever you begin your code, you want to make sure that you always set your variables first. So in this case, we have our door model. So you're just going to go ahead and define that. So local model equals script.Parent. So door model, the door model itself, is the parent of this script object, which is this here, this script. Secondly, there are three very important parts to this door model. This button here, which is an invisible part I use to cover the handle, so that there's more surface area for the people to click on. This other button, which is another part that also covers this other handle. And, most importantly, this pivot. Now this pivot is what we're going to use to do our tweening. What this pivot is just a very, very long part that covers the entire axis. It doesn't have to be this long, it can be shorter. You want to make sure the middle is exactly where you want this the whole thing to turn around. As you can see, I made it square and then just made it very long. This makes sure that the door does not displace itself when it's rotating. This for a longer part, the door would probably do some weirder things. Just make sure it has like a square base, as you can see here. And now just place it wherever you want the door to rotate around. This is going to be your axis of rotation. So we're going to call this pivot. And everything else is going to be welded to this pivot, including the door part itself, which is this one. So, we're going to define those two things I just mentioned. So local button 1 is going to be equal to model WaitForChild button 1. And the reason we're using WaitForChild is to make sure the game loads in button 1 before we actually call it, just in case it errors out. Since there's two buttons, we're going to define this twice. We're going to define this new line as local button 2, model WaitForChild button 2. And last but not least, our pivot. So local pivot equals model, also WaitForChild, pivot. So those are our three most important parts in my own model. You might have some more important parts, maybe less, but the pivot is going to be your core essential part of this door. So once those are out of the way, I'm just going to name this as variables so that my code is a bit more organized. We're going to define or functions. Now functions are what's going to make the door do stuff. So we want to make sure everything is welded. So what we're going to do is a loop. We're going to use a for loop, and we're going to iterate through all the children of the door model, detect if it's apart, and if it's apart, we'll weld it to the pivot. But with one exception. If the part is called frame, in my case, it's not going to weld. It's going to stay anchored as it is. And the reason for this is just in case you have your door with the frame and it's all in the same model and you don't want to take it out of the model. This will ensure that it does not get welded to the pivot and then the pivot won't be able to move. So you have to make sure if there's any parts in this, try and name them with the same string, containing the same string. In my case, it's frame. Frame is repeated throughout these 4 parts. And that's going to be very helpful when we're doing all the welds. So for underscore, I put underscore here because we're not going to be using this first part of this for loop, which is usually I. It can be anything you want though. I'm just going to use underscore because I'm not going to use that part. So for underscore v in pairs model get children, this gets the children and it makes a table with them. Do. And the pairs comes from the table containing the position of each object and the object itself. That's what in pairs means. So now through every iteration of for, we're going to be cycling through every child of door, but in a random order. There's no way to know what order it's going to be in. So what we're going to do first is make sure that it does not contain either frame. Also make sure it's not called pivot. And every time we do that, we're just going to insert or weld. And we're going to weld it to the pivot itself. So if string.find, this is our special command to make sure the part itself is not containing frame. If it contains frame, we skip it. So string.find v.Name, which is the container we want to analyze, v.Name frame. If it contains frame, so if this is nil, then that's good, we can continue. And v.Name is not equal to. So to get this squiggly line, which is not equal to, it's a bit hard to find sometimes, you want to press Control-Alt-4. Control-Alt-4, press it twice, you can see it'll appear twice as well. So v.Name, squiggly line equals pivot.Name, or just pivot, you can see here, pivot. So if it doesn't coincide with your pivot, and by the way, just in case, I'm actually going to change this to pivot.Name, just in case your pivot has a different name. So you go, and v.Name is not equal to pivot.Name. And we want to make sure it is apart. Well, it is either apart. You can also use these instead if you don't want to use what I'm using. Because I use these and just have a habit to this. They really do the same thing. There is no difference. And v is apart, or v. In my case, I don't actually have any union operations or mesh parts, but just in case you do, I'm just going to put these here just to make sure nothing happens. If anyone else has mesh parts or union operations. Or v is a mesh part. Then, just following the syntax. So now we've checked to make sure that it only contains one of these parts that we have here. So if all this works, when we get to this, now we want to create our weld. So local weld equals instance.new weld constraint. And weld constraint is much better than our old weld, but it's also an object you use. But a weld constraint, in a weld constraint, you don't have to set the CFrame property. It always does it automatically for you. Now we're just going to parent it to the v, the part itself. So each part that's welded to the pivot will have a weld constraint. And the weld is going to have 2 properties we want to change. So weld.part0, which is the part which is going to create the weld. In this case, the pivot, or main part. And weld.part1, the part that we want to be welded to the pivot itself, which is v. Once this has been done, we can go ahead and say v.anchored equals false. And this is unanchored part. So when we tween, the pivot rotates and nothing is stopping it. So this is what's going to weld everything. Now we're going to go back to our variables and set a new variable called tweenService. This is what's going to allow us to tween. So local tweenService equals game GetService tweenService. Once you define the service, which with this syntax game GetService, we're also going to set another few things related to the tween. So when we're tweening, we have the object, the tween info, and the goal. And what the tween info is going to tell us all the stuff we want to know about the tween. So what kind of animation it's going to have, how long it's going to be, what easing style it's going to have. So we're going to do local tweenInfo equals TweenInfo.new. And we're going to be using one tweenInfo for closing and opening, but you can use different ones if you want. So once we define tweenInfo, we do TweenInfo.new. I'm just going to use the settings I used for my other door model. So 1.25 seconds, 1.25, Enum.EasingStyle.Elastic, which made it very interesting, the door animation. I'm going to use Enum.EasingDirection.Out. It's going to make it smooth out every time it opens or closes. Repeat count 0. Bool, if it's going to reverse, we're going to call false, and delay time 0. I'm just going to use it this way just in case you have more than one tween. If you make it true and then have a delay, it'll open, wait a few seconds, and then close. And that'll shorten your code. But just in case you're using a different tween to close, maybe you want to make it slower, I'm not going to change these properties. So we're going to be using this whole tween info for everything. And now, when it comes to goals, we want 3 different goals. We want one goal to be when it opens this way, another goal when it opens this way, and lastly, the goal to make it reset back to its original point. So we're going to do local open goal 1. As you can see, I'm going to call one open goal 1 and the other one open goal 2, relating to these 2 variables we have here, button 1 and button 2. So every 1 is going to relate to this button 1 here, and every 2 is going to relate to this button 2. So local open goal, and we have to use the syntax of a table, which are these 2 squiggly lines here. You find them right underneath your other lines, these ones. So let's define that. We want to change our CFrame property, so we're just going to go ahead and write CFrame equals the syntax you're using here. CFrame equals the pivot.CFrame itself times CFrame.Angles. This is what's going to rotate it. So we have 0 math.rad, which converts whatever number you put in here into radians. If you don't know what radians are, don't alarm yourself. But that's what the rad stands for. It stands for radians. So math.rad minus 80. As far as I tested this, I think that's the right number. It might not work later, but it's not a big deal right now. And 0. We only want to rotate it on this axis here, which is our Z axis. Once we've done that, or Y axis, pardon me. So once we've done that, we're going to copy. And now we want to do our other open goal. What happens when we click it from the other side? I'm going to change this to the opposite. So one is negative, one is positive, but they will both open the same amount of degrees from the middle. And last but not least, we want to define our closeGoal. And this is going to be exactly what the pivot started like. So closeGoal. And here we're just going to remove this completely. CFrame.Angles. There's no need. So this is just set it back to its current CFrame. This saves immediately when the script loads, and that CFrame will stay there all the time. So those are the 3 different goals you want, and we also want 3 different tweens. So now we're going to be using the tweenService, the only function that the tweenService has, which is tweenService create. So we're going to have the local open one. This is going to be our tween. Local open one equals tweenService create, and the create function takes in 3 arguments. The first one is the object we want to tween, which is the pivot, not the door, the pivot. Then the tween info we're going to be using, the one we defined earlier. And lastly, the goal. For open 1, we're going to be using open goal 1. Of course, we have another open, so we're going to call this open 2, relating to button 2, and simply change this in our copy paste. Copy paste, by the way, is Control C after you've selected something by holding down, and then Control V wherever you want to paste it. And last but not least, we're also going to do local close. This is what's going to make our pivot tween back to its closest position, and we're going to tie it to this closeGoal. So we're going to change this last part from open goal 1, in my case, to closeGoal. So those are our 3 tweens, and we're going to be calling this in the functions section. So continuing on, we want a function that opens the door when an event fires, waits a few seconds, and then closes. So we're going to define local function. What should I call this? Let's call it door action. Or we can even call it tween door. That makes a bit more sense. So when we call this, we want to play this one first, or whichever one we want to play. And since there's two, we want to have one function for both opens. And I'll show you how we're going to do this in a sec. But for now, this is the argument we're going to pass through our custom function. So tween play. Then we wait whatever you want. You can change this time, by the way. This wait, it can be 2, it can be 1,000,000. It does not matter. You can just change that to wherever you want and play around with it. So once we play that, we always want to play the closeGoal. So close play. And that'll just make it go back to its original position. And aside from this, we also want to do another function, but I'm not going to define that yet because it makes more sense to go straight to our events first. Now, we're definitely past halfway in our script, so don't worry about it. It's just a few more lines. We want to define two events. When we click the click detector in button 1, and when we click the click detector in button 2. So button 1 dot click detector, and we want to get the mouse click event of it. So dot mouse click connect function, and that is our first event. We're just going to go ahead and copy this and paste it down below. And it's going to be your second event for button 2 dot click detector, the mouse click. And they're both going to call this one here, so tween door. The difference is one of them is going to have the argument of open goal 1, or just open 1, and the other one is going with the argument of open 2. So what's going on here? So when either of these events fires, we're firing the same function, but we're passing a different argument. In one, we're passing open 1, which makes it open that way, and open 2, which makes it open the opposite way. What this does, it receives the tween, and it plays whatever tween we pass through the argument. So we're just saving lines of code and making it a lot more simple to view when we're doing this. So this has shortened our code significantly. And aside from this, this isn't as necessary, but just to make sure that no one interferes with the door while it's being opened or closed, or while it's in its opened position, we want to deactivate the click detectors so it doesn't mess up. Because usually in mind games, something goes wrong, so we want to make sure that does not happen. None of that. So we're going to local function click detector change, maybe click detector change. Yes, let's call it this. This is going to change our distance. So we're going to pass the argument as distance in our custom function. And what we want to do is simply change the max activation distance of both of them. So we're going to do button 1 dot click detector. And by the way, the reason we're not using WaitForChild anymore is because this is definitely loaded by the time it's called. So you don't need to. But it's not bad practice to use a WaitForChild if you want to. So button 1 dot click detector dot max activation distance, property we want to change, equals distance. So whenever we call this function, we can just tell it to do 0 distance, 1,000,000 distance, whatever distance you want. But when it's open, I prefer to keep it at 0 so it cannot be activated whatsoever. And of course, since we have two buttons with two click detectors, we're going to copy paste, change this to button 2. So now they're both being called. Now, once all this has been done, I think we're actually finished. Yeah. So if nothing goes wrong, this should be working already. So let's go ahead and test. I'm not sure which door is which, but we'll figure it out. And of course, if there's any problems with the script, that's perfect because we can learn how to debug as well. So we click the door. As you can see, there's no errors. It's also good to have your output open. So this is the old model. That works. And that works. And it works as intended. As you can see, it'll open in the opposite direction of whatever side we click on. And we can't click it anymore. So you can see it's not triggering it. It seems to still be activated, but it's actually not doing anything. So that would be everything done. Wait, actually, it is being activated, isn't it? I think it is. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we found a bug. And the bug is we're not actually calling this from these scripts when we're doing this. we want to call it from this function. We want it to call click detector change. That's very important we actually debug that. As you can see, we did not get errors, but by testing the door we figured out that there was something wrong with this. So you want to call this function. I want to change it whatever distance we want. So at the beginning we probably want to change it to 0, and we want to find to trigger this beforehand. I think that might fix it. There we go. So make sure this function is defined before this one, and once everything is done plain, we'll set it back to its, oh god, pardon me, we set it back to its original distance, which is 20. So now if we run the game, there should be no difference when the mouse changes when we go over that part anymore. Again, this is the door. Click it. As you can see, the mouse does not change its icon. That means you can't click it. Now you can again. You can also add a delay here. If you want to make sure that before you can click it again, you do not want to change the activation distance, just add another wait under here. You can wait whatever you want. But I think that's the end of this tutorial. As you can see, now the door is working perfectly. Except for this bug. What's that about? Maybe not perfectly. I think that, okay, that's a visual glitch. As you can see, I can't walk through here because the game's just broken. That's not actually the door doing anything. Yeah, it's just the game. Just to show you, I'm not lying. We'll test it again. That sometimes happens. Studio is a bit buggy. As you can see, there should not be any problems now. If I click it again, once it closes, there you go. And I can't click it anymore. And I'll close this again. So there you go. That is my tweening door. And if you want to know how to make the other door, which is the hinge constraint door, it's a bit more heavy intensive when it comes to like actually making the door. But you can also get some cool effects, and it's not as laggy. So it really is up to you. But anyway, I'm going to stop the video here. Thank you very much for being with me this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one. Leave any suggestions you want to see down below in the comment section.